owns you. I'd like to think that I own myself, but politicians often act as if they own us.
People should not have power over other people's lives.
Lawyer Tim Sandefur is the author of You Don't Own Me.
Ours is a nation where the individual's right to pursue happiness is written into its foundational document. And that's reflected in our culture.
In this longer than usual interview, I talked to him about Hollywood movies, about which states are freest, about why he's a libertarian, and other issues he raises in You Don't Own Me.
The title comes from the famous song from the 1960s by Leslie Gore, which was a feminist anthem at the time, saying, I have the right to run my own life and make my own decisions in the world. But her song then became kind of an anthem for other groups also as time went on. Gays, blacks, and other minority groups in American society latched onto the song, and I thought that made a wonderful opening to talk about the principle of self-ownership and the person's right to direct their own life without having to answer to other people.
What do you mean by self-ownership?
Self-ownership means that I'm in charge of my own desires, dreams. I'm responsible for my own self.
Well, that's kind of obvious.
It should be, but unfortunately, a lot of people ignore this and they say, well, you're responsible for other people, or that other people must be responsible for you. When in the end, every person is self-responsible.
I feel responsible for other people, helpless people. I think that's right.
Certainly, there's nothing wrong with helping other people in need. But when things come down to brass tacks, each of us is responsible for our own decisions and our own lives. And what I mean by responsible is that we are the ones, each of us, who suffers the pains or enjoys the rewards of the decisions that we make in life. And there's no way to get around that. You can't give away your hopes and dreams, your loves, your interests, your tastes to other people. You're responsible for yourself ultimately, and that means because you are responsible and will be held responsible by others, that you must be free to make choices in your own life.
So this message became the anthem of a lot of these groups. But a lot of these groups today don't preach individualism.
That is true. I think beginning in the mid-1960s, there was this retreat from the principle of self-direction and self-responsibility. And instead, there was a more collectivist attitude that was embraced in many sections of the culture.
People don't know what collectivist means.
Well, there was this attitude that came to be popular that you're responsible to a group, to society, to the race, to the nation, and that it was wrong for you to focus your attention on achieving your hopes and dreams in this life.
For example?
You see a lot of conservative critics condemning a lot of the art, the literature, and the films that we have come to take for granted as being pro-individualist in their orientation. And very often you'll read critics complaining about these films as being too selfish. And our culture has really nurtured this attitude that we should be less focused on ourselves and more focused on other people. These days, it's always about teamwork and putting other people above yourself. It's relentless, as opposed to my life belongs to me and I have the right to pursue my own dreams with that life.
Teamwork sounds nicer.
And it absolutely can be nice, of course. If I join a sports team, then it's my responsibility to do my best to see that the team wins, of course. But on the other hand, my life ultimately belongs to me, and I have the right to choose my own path, even if that means that I have to break off ties with people that I no longer think are serving my values in life.
Did you call them conservative critics?
Yeah, I would call them socially conservative critics in the sense that, the old term liberal meant to be self-directed, to liberate the individual to achieve his or her goals in life. Whereas the social conservative is more concerned with social organization, with keeping society together. One way to put it would be that liberals are concerned with social lubricants that allow people to rise in society, whereas conservatives are more concerned with social glues that hold them together.
And what's wrong with that?
The problem is that the individual owns him or herself and does not, in fact, owe it to others to live for the sake of society as a whole.
Getting so sick of this modern life. Let's live on a commune.
Communes have been tried. It's a noble idea.
I don't think it's noble at all. I think it consists of sacrificing what is great and beautiful about the individual, about human life. What's great and wonderful about human beings is that they can form their own ideas and pursue their own paths in life. And when they sacrifice that for the sake of some allegedly higher goal, what they're doing is putting out the light that is really special in them.
They fail and keep failing. To my knowledge, only one ever succeeded.
Right, Oneida and Omana colonies, those colonies ended up succeeding only by transforming themselves into corporations that made and sold products for the consumer. In fact, probably one of the most allegedly successful communes of the 19th century was the Shaker communes. The Shakers were a religious group in the mid-19th century that tried to abolish all individuality and live together collectively. And they were a very pervasive collective in that the rules even dictated when you folded your hands, which hand went over which hand in this society, what foot you should put on the steps when you went up a set of stairs. It was a very controlling society. No, the communes have always failed because they are contrary to the individualist nature of human life.
People think the Israeli kibbutz succeeded.
And in fact, the kibbutz are a great example of the failure of the communes. So the Israeli kibbutz ended up falling apart in the wake of World War II, when a lot of soldiers returned from overseas with consumer goods like toasters and coffee pots, which then started people saying, well, that belongs to me, and no, that doesn't belong to you. And it started breaking down this culture of collectivism that had been carefully sculpted in the Israeli kibbutz, so that the ones that continue today are, like the Oneida and Amana colonies, really just corporations that create products for sale on the market.
And how is that different from a we're working together commune?
In the sense that there's commonality or cooperation, those things are in common. But what these organizations have become are self-interested groups, each seeking their own profit, with every individual being paid or compensated in some way and free to pursue their own lives, which is just how it ought to be.
Your title, You Don't Own Me, is a good one, but government seems to own a lot of us.
It certainly thinks that it owns us. Government's attitude is that freedom belongs to the government and it can parcel it out to us in exchange for our promises to pay. So take, for example, building licensing requirements or building permit requirements. What a building permit really says is you're not allowed to build on your own property until the government gives you that permission, and you have to pay for that permission. So in other words, the government has essentially confiscated your land and sells it back to you in exchange for more rights.
And one result is that things you could build in a year now take 10 years and cost 20 times as much.
That's right. The Empire State Building was built in a single year, and it's unimaginable that you could accomplish a project like that, or even just the paperwork for a project like that within a year today.
Government forced me to get vaccinated, forces me to pay into Social Security, forces people to get approval to buy a gun, to get a hunting license, a fishing license, have to get permission to braid someone's hair, to be paid to do their nails or help them move.
Yes, something like, I think it's 2/3 of businesses in America today require some form of government permission slip for you to do your job. And it's everything from something as simple as barbering to something as complicated as engineering. What the government does is it says if you want to earn a living, you first have to get permission, often from your own competitors, which is not only unconstitutional, but a violation of the fundamental principle that you have the right to pursue happiness.
I want some limits on greedy business people. If someone's going to build a polluting factory next to my kid's school, I want some rules.
I totally agree, and libertarianism agrees. But I also want limits on greedy politicians. A good example of that, for example, would be several years ago, the EPA itself was responsible for a huge toxic waste spill in the Animas River of Colorado. It literally turned the river a bright, disgusting yellow color. Nobody got fired for that. Nobody got sent to jail for that because it was the EPA that did that. So it was the government, so it all just sort of went away. If a private business had done that, you can bet there would have been civil and criminal penalties and possibly even jail time. When the government does these things wrong, somehow or another, that's okay. But when private business does it, then it's greedy capitalism at its worst.
We libertarians don't want no rules.
Right.
There should be some government regulation. Where do you draw the line?
The line should be drawn when you're harming other people. So the obvious example is, the old saying that your freedom to swing your fist ends where my nose begins. But sometimes it's much more complicated than that. For example, nuisances. If you're doing something on your property that makes it more difficult for me to enjoy my land, or environmental pollution. If you're pouring something into the river and the river flows by my property and it's poisoning my plants or something like that, then the government should be involved. And we have these complicated legal systems that have evolved over the years to answer that situation, to say, if you're committing a nuisance that harms somebody else's property rights, then the government should intervene. There's an old saying among lawyers that your right to use your property must respect other people's right to use their property. And that's not always an easy line to draw between one person's property and another person's property, but that's why we have a legal system, and there's certainly plenty of work for the government to do there. But the easy answer is that government should intervene only when you are harming some other person.
And yet the political class always pushes for more rules, and no kid goes on a school field trip and asks, what laws have you repealed? It's all, what laws have you passed?
Yeah, well, that's because politicians want to look like good guys, and the way to look like a good guy is by getting legislation passed. If you take something off the books, that often doesn't even end up in the news. So politicians want to go in with some creative new plan to create some new program so that they can take the credit. And by the time the bills come due, of course, they've moved on to some other office. And then the rest of us are stuck having to live with the program that they created. So unfortunately, there is an incentive for politicians to be more and more active in creating bigger and bigger government systems, and not really a lot of pressure to encourage them to reduce the size and scope of government. That's why we have a constitution. One of the roles of the Constitution is to limit the ambitions of politicians to look like good guys.
Government has grown and keeps growing. So now innovators try to get around the rules by just breaking them and hoping for the best. It's better to ask forgiveness than permission.
Right. Yes. Or as my friend Adam Thierer puts it, permissionless innovation. It is true. Unfortunately, many areas of government now force you to get permission to try a new idea in ways that will very often hinder the development of new ideas, handicap innovation in many ways. And so it is true that a lot of people have taken the step of trying to just go ahead and break the rules and see if it works out. A lot of public officials were very opposed to Uber and Lyft when they were new because they seemed to be violating the taxi cab laws.
Illegal, dangerous, out of control. Those are just some of the ways lawmakers are describing ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft.
Well, where would we be without Uber and Lyft today?
But the politicians don't apologize and say, I was short-sighted.
No, of course not. They're always the visionaries.
But look at all the people who were hurt, the taxi drivers.
This is the problem. One of the big problems with explaining libertarianism to people is that it often turns on what is known as the unseen costs. So there's this old story about a baker who shows up for work one day and finds that the window of his bakery has been broken by vandals during the night. And as he's sweeping up the glass, a friend comes up to him and says, don't worry, now you're going to spend the $100 on a new piece of glass and that'll be good for the economy, creates jobs. Well, that's fallacious because he was going to spend the $100 on a new coat, and then he would have a coat and a window. Now he only has the window and he doesn't have the coat. The coat never gets made. It's the unseen cost of the vandalism. Unfortunately, a lot of people can't imagine what could have been if the government hadn't taken away our money through the taxation in order to fund what politicians think is a good idea. And so what you see are the projects that the politicians approve of. And you don't see what we might have had otherwise. What kinds of innovations and creations and inventions that never get created because politicians interfered. The Ubers and Lyfts that never came about because some politician preferred to spend that money on some pet project instead.
Like California's multi-billion-dollar train to nowhere. If California hadn't tried and continues to fail to build a rail line, the invisible things would have been better?
Yeah, how much would Californians have done with the colossal amount of money that has now been wasted on the failed train to nowhere? It's unimaginable what could have been accomplished with that money, and instead has gone into a pit in the ground.
Are some states freer than others?
Yes, some states are much better
What's the freest state?
I would put in a bid for Arizona. Some years ago, Arizona passed a universal licensing law that says that if you have an occupational license from another state and you move into Arizona, you will automatically get the equivalent license in Arizona. Which only makes sense, right? You don't forget how to be an architect when you move from California to Arizona. By crossing a state line, you don't forget how to do your job. And yet in a lot of states, if you move into that state, you now have to go back and take some test or get some government approval to get a new license to do what you were already doing. And it's been very successful in Arizona. If you make it so that people can move from state to state with their occupational licenses, then you create sort of a competitive system where people can, as they say, vote with their feet and move to a different state if they want to, if that state is providing a better government more suited to their needs. That's why we have a system that has different states so that you can choose where you live. Such licensing laws are going to ensure that politicians focus where they ought to focus, on protecting public safety instead of protecting established businesses against competition.
It's good that people can vote with their feet, so to speak. And you look at these maps of which states are gaining people and which are losing people. They reveal a lot about where people are free or more free.
What we've seen in recent years is an overall outflow of people from California, for example, for the first time in living memory.
And New York.
And they're moving to places like Texas and other states that have a reputation for being freer and having less restrictions, and also a culture that people feel more at home with. People can choose where they want to live, and we ought to encourage that by saying if you want to move from one state to another, then you can still practice your job there.
And it's not just warmer weather they're moving to Idaho.
Right. Well, better potatoes.
I live in New York. I suspect it's the least free state.
It might very well be, with the possible exception of California. You know, seeing these images from the horrible fires in Southern California recently, and you realize that those houses have still not been rebuilt, and who knows when they will be rebuilt, because you need so many forms of government permission before you're allowed to rebuild those homes. I think the jury's still out on whether that will ever take place.
But it's beautiful land. It's growing back. Why would it not take place?
Well, because you need all sorts of government permission, and that takes the form of environmental reports and use permits and so forth that often take a great deal of time to complete. Right? To complete the required environmental reports under the California Environmental Quality Act can take years. And then anybody in the area can object to your development plans, and the process has to halt while all the concerns are reviewed by a group of bureaucrats.
They want to make sure it's safe.
That's right, or good for the environment, or pretty. A lot of the time it's purely subjective, right? If you want to build a building, you often have to go through what's called architectural design review, when the bureaucrats get to say whether they think your building is going to be pretty enough based on purely subjective criteria.
Now, you are a lawyer who fights against some of these rules in court. Are you successful?
Yes, I think we've made a great deal of progress in, say, the past 20 years or so. A number of federal and state courts have struck down occupational licensing laws and other kinds of permit requirements that violate the basic rules of reasonableness and don't actually protect consumers, but actually just protect existing businesses from legitimate competition.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
You write about how Star Trek changed.
Yes, Star Trek as a franchise has sort of paralleled the evolution of liberalism in American history from the Vietnam era to the present day. The original Star Trek, which aired from 1966 to 1969 during the Vietnam era, was written by and made by World War II veterans, right? Gene Roddenberry, who invented the series, was a World War II veteran. James Doohan, who played Scotty, actually lost a finger at D-Day. So these guys had been through World War II, and the lesson that they learned from World War II is that you can't look the other way when evil is going on in the world. All people have fundamental rights that should be respected. That's basically the framework of the original Star Trek. So Captain Kirk goes around the galaxy liberating alien races from oppression as an expression of the universal rights of all sentient beings. But by the time Star Trek The Next Generation came on, that started in 1987 and went till 1994. That's after the Vietnam War. That's the liberalism of Bill Clinton instead, which is very morally and culturally relativistic. Star Trek The Next Generation has this perspective that there are no universal moral truths, that everybody just does things their own way. And as a result, Captain Picard is often trying to avoid conflict instead of resolve conflict. Whenever something comes up, he frequently will say, well, it's none of our business. If one people wishes to oppress another people, who are we to complain? Which is the exact opposite of the view that the original Star Trek took.
And what does that have to do with today's liberalism?
Today's liberalism tends to embrace this moral neutrality, this moral relativism that says that, it's none of our business what other people do in other societies, which is exactly the opposite of the lesson that the original Star Trek creators had learned from World War II. One
scene from your book, Kirk says,
These are people, not robots. They should have the opportunity of choice. We owe it to them to interfere.
Star Trek has this idea called the Prime Directive that says that the captain should never interfere in an alien culture. Well, in the original Star Trek, this Prime Directive was viewed as an evil thing. Captain Kirk is a hero because he breaks this rule all the time in order to liberate the oppressed people of the galaxy.
The Enterprise didn't even have seatbelts. But now the actor who played Captain Kirk is an advocate for safety rules.
We're at the point where the Enterprise wouldn't get off the ground.
How do you have too many safety rules? You don't know that wall isn't going to fall in. And if it fell in, and then you said, why didn't you make a rule?
That sounds like something the Enterprise's next captain would say.
By the time Star Trek The Next Generation came along, the Prime Directive had become sort of a holy commandment that it's never any of our business to interfere in another society, with the result that you have more tyranny and enslavement going on throughout the galaxy.
History has proved again and again that whenever mankind interferes with a less developed civilization, the results are invariably disastrous.
I mean, what a horrible idea, right? History has not proven that when you reach out to help somebody who's being oppressed or tyrannized over or wronged in some way, that there's something evil about that. Quite the reverse. One of the good things that we have accomplished in recent history is the discovery that, in fact, we ought to worry about our neighbor's freedom and our neighbor's welfare.
But liberals today say, yes, we shouldn't be so self-interested. We should help other people. And that seems to contradict your point.
We're talking about a wide spectrum of people with widely different views. But I think what happens in general is that today's liberalism tends to be very morally relativistic and to say that, well, what one people believes is right and wrong, we shouldn't, exercise judgment in that regard. And that's a very Star Trek The Next Generation idea. The reason people do that is they think non-judgmentalism is a path to peace. But non-judgmentalism is not a path to peace. The idea of, well, you do your thing and I'll do my thing and we'll get along somehow doesn't actually work because people have conflicting views about what is right and wrong. There has to be a universal standard of justice, of human rights. And unfortunately, today's liberalism tends to shy away from that.
What's an example?
When you see what's going on in China or North Korea or other countries, and you have people in the United States say, well, if they want to oppress their own people, who are we to judge? Or in the Muslim Middle East, the oppression of women and other groups that are going on in the Middle East, you very often find people today say, well, it's unfortunate that goes on, but who are we to judge? We can't enforce our views on other people.
But I think if you look at our attempt to bring freedom to Iraq, you can't force it.
Unfortunately, what the Iraq lesson really teaches is that culture is really the dominant consideration in other countries. It's not a simple cure. You can't just go in and fix it overnight. But I do think that it can be fixed, and it has to be fixed through a long process of teaching people about the inalienable rights of all human beings.
Captain Picard says,
I'm bound by the rules of the United Federation of Planets, which order me not to interfere with other worlds, other cultures.
Captain Picard takes very seriously this idea of cultural relativism that, it's none of our business if some other society wants to oppress its own people. And unfortunately, what results from that is the growth of colossal tyrannies And ultimately, that's going to be a threat to you. You know, Ronald Reagan had this old saying about the person who feeds the alligator hoping that it will eat him last. If you look the other way while giant tyrannies like Putin's Russia go, unrestrained in invading other nations, ultimately that gun is going to get pointed at you.
Sandefur says you see the change in American attitudes in movies. The most popular movies are often about individual heroes.
That's right.
But something changed.
American culture tends to be very pro-individualistic because ours is a nation where the individual's right to pursue happiness is written into its foundational document. And that's reflected in our culture, the idea of the self-made person, the person who's able to pull himself up by his own bootstraps, or as Frederick Douglass said, climb up the ladder that he has made himself. That idea is deeply embedded in our culture. And as a result, films that are pro-individualistic tend to be very successful and very popular and to stick in the public consciousness.
Films like?
Good ones that come to mind are some of the Pixar movies have been very pro-individualistic, have been about pursuing your dreams, even while recognizing your responsibilities to other people. Films like Up or Wall-E or the Cars movies. These are movies that the reason why people love and celebrate them is because they're about the individual pursuing his or her dreams.
And yet Hollywood is always trying to influence us to help the group.
It is true that Hollywood very often is trying to propagandize to us about the evils of individualism and teach us, especially environmental propaganda that is very popular in Hollywood today. Films like Mother or Avatar that are basically telling us that we should not pursue our own dreams and our own future and instead should try and curtail our own behavior for the benefit of society. I like to say that there are really two paths in life, two strategies in life. There's make more and there's use less. Make more is the idea of growing and expanding and increasing the crop yields or power plants and so forth in order to create more opportunities for life. Use less is the idea that we should curtail our dreams and aspirations in order to use only what we already have. Now, those strategies are appropriate in different times and places. If you're in a lifeboat with limited rations, then use less makes a lot of sense. But in the long run, the use less strategy is suicidal. The only path to the flourishing and happiness of human life is the make more path.
Why is it suicidal?
Because you end up using less and less until you run out of resources because you can't make more.
Avatar is the most successful movie of all time.
These movies are often very successful, but kind of in spite of themselves. Another good example of that would be Jurassic Park, right? The theme of Jurassic Park is that it's a Frankenstein movie. It's about the evils and dangers of science. The Jeff Goldblum character says, science is the rape of the natural world.
It's what you call discovery. I call the rape of the natural world.
Which is really a horrifying thought. And yet people love the movie because they love the dinosaurs. And actually, we kind of like the idea that science might bring dinosaurs back someday. So a lot of the time, I think these movies succeed with audiences in spite of their philosophical aspirations. And that's a good thing, because a lot of the time, the philosophy is terrible.
What's the difference between a collectivist story and an individualist story?
I think an individualist story is a story that talks about the person's right to pursue happiness, to chase down their dreams, to pay the costs and struggle, and finally triumph. Whereas there's also a collectivist strain in literature and in movies that teaches that it's wrong for the individual to do this, that this is selfish, and that instead what you ought to do is devote your life and your attention to making other people happy. The whole idea of you don't own me translates into the idea that I don't exist to make other people happy. My life is mine, and I have the right to devote it to the purposes that I want to devote it to.
Sounds selfish.
Yeah, and in a sense it is. But of course, it's also true that one of the reasons that I might want to spend my life for is to helping other people that I love, my wife and my kids, my community, and so forth. Those things matter to me, and so they are of selfish value to me. And so for me to try and make them happy in some degree is certainly a good thing. But when it comes down to it, my life belongs to me, and I have the right to say no if I want to. That's what individualism is.
You want something, go get it.
The Pursuit of Happiness is a wonderful film that expresses exactly the individualism that, when Hollywood does right, is really very moving and powerful and very popular with audiences, which is that you have the responsibility to direct your own life, and you should do your best to achieve that and enjoy the rewards of that. That's what all of us have freedom for. That's really the essence of what America is about. Rocky is another wonderful example.
You start this fight, I'll kill you.
What I think I love most about Rocky is, spoiler alert, that he doesn't win in the end. Because Rocky learns something from going through the difficulty of training and straining himself to the utmost in order to have this fight. And in the end, he triumphs over himself. He makes himself a better person. He discovers something about himself because he's devoted himself to this dream. And even though he doesn't win the fight, he wins the more important fight.
We're sending you back to the future.
Back to the Future is perhaps unique in all science fiction in that it is a time travel story about free will. It's a story where you do have the ability to change the future. You can make a difference in your life, right? Marty learns that there's nothing you can't accomplish if you put your mind to it. Compare that to all the other time travel stories in science fiction where, if you step on a butterfly, it'll lead to Hitler winning World War II or something like that. And they're deeply anti-free will stories. And the reason Back to the Future resonates so strongly with audiences is that it teaches the opposite, that you really are in control of your life and you can make a better world.
The individual can make things better.
Absolutely.
But lately, more movies reject individualism and growth. Talk about Strange World?
Strange World is an example of the collectivist themes that I was talking about. The theme of Strange Worlds is that we're damaging the Earth through this energy technology in the film.
This world that we live on is a living thing, and Pando is killing it. If we want to survive, Pando has to go.
And that what we really ought to do is abandon this energy technology completely in order to save the world. And yet abandoning this energy means that we will have less fuel to run our daily lives, to power everything from ambulances to airplanes, right? And the film shrugs at that and treats that as a triviality.
Next stop, no power, cold coffee, and angry masses. Who's ready to go home?
Living without today's energy technology doesn't just mean doing without warm coffee. It means doing without ambulances when you're having a heart attack, doing without an airplane to carry people's organ transplant, doing without the kind of emergency transportation that we need. Doing without today's energy technology would be a colossal disaster for the human race. And yet the movie kind of ridicules that concern.
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Talk about the changes in The Wizard of Oz.
The original Wizard of Oz is this very optimistic, joyful film about somebody who always had the strength within her to accomplish her dreams. And through her journey, that's what she discovers.
You've always had the power to go back to Kansas.
She could have always found the way home. The new films, the Wicked films, are the reverse of that. There's no joy in Wicked. The overwhelming attitude of the film is pity, as opposed to joy and triumph and accomplishing one's dreams. What's actually striking about Wicked is that Elphaba doesn't really have any dream or desire in the film. If she has a dream at all, it's to not be picked on by other people. Her secret power is resentment toward the fact that other people have ridiculed or teased her, or even the fact that other people are popular, that she has a resentment toward. And so the moral arc of the story is her being picked on by other people and wanting to get out from under that, which is very different from a film in which the character has a great dream in life and goes out and pursues it and wants to accomplish something. And so it makes it much harder to cheer for Elphaba as a result. You feel sorry for Elphaba, but you don't really admire her for anything.
And what does this have to do with your book title, You Don't Own Me?
You Don't Own Me expresses the principle that my life is mine and my dreams are mine, and I have a right and a responsibility to set a goal for my life and to pursue it. And that means I'm not focused primarily on what other people think of me. My life isn't defined by other people's attitudes toward me. My life is defined by my own relationship to reality and the world. Elphaba, on the other hand, her entire existence is lived through other people's attitudes toward her.
The world needs you.
Another flop was Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman 1984, the theme there is the idea that you should sacrifice for the good of the whole. The villain in that film has this power to grant wishes to people. And it's a thinly veiled political satire. And ultimately, Wonder Woman decides that the way to defeat the villain is that everybody should give up their wishes.
Renounce your wish if you want to save this world.
And so we're taught that we should not want things, we should not desire or dream things, and that will save the world. It's rather a silly theme, but a deeply anti-individualistic one.
And it flopped.
Yeah. I think American audiences are in love with individualism, in love with heroes who accomplish their dreams, work hard toward achieving happiness, and achieve it. The movies that are really successful with American audiences tend to be embodiments of the principle of the pursuit of happiness. It's a sign of the health of our culture.
The Charlie's Angel redo, directed by Elizabeth Banks. She blamed men for the box office failure. If this movie doesn't make money, it reinforces the stereotype in Hollywood that men don't go see women do action movies.
I've been asked to go see movies starring men my entire life, and happily have done so. And I don't know why men don't return the f***ing favor.
Yes. Very often in recent years, Hollywood has tended to blame audiences for not getting on board with politically motivated cinema. And it's really very immature that Hollywood acts this way. When nobody saw the lousy Ghostbusters remake, for example.
My name is Erin Gilbert, Doctor of Particle Physics.
It was because America is so angry at women or something like this. And the reality is that people are very eager to see movies that are about triumph and achievement and heroes who stand up for their beliefs. And they're not interested in seeing just another lame remake that satisfies all the politically correct tests.
And Elizabeth Banks is just wrong. Men like the original Charlie's Angels series.
Much so. That's right. In fact, it was Ayn Rand's favorite television show.
You're a libertarian.
Right.
Why?
I believe libertarianism expresses the idea that the individual is in charge of his or her own life and has the right to achieve happiness or suffer the pains of making wrong decisions with the opportunity to straighten out their lives and live them right if they want to. I'm a libertarian because I believe that freedom is the natural state of all human beings.
Which seems right to me. And yet this is a tremendously unpopular political philosophy.
That is true. And I think part of the reason why is because libertarianism hasn't been sufficiently explained to a lot of people. They think libertarianism consists of doing whatever you feel like.
Libertine.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, the opposite is the case. A truly free society is one where people have to take a great deal of self-responsibility because nobody else is going to be out there to pay your bills for you. Being mature means paying your own bills. And a lot of people don't like that for one reason or another. Either they don't want to pay their own bills, or they think that it's cruel and unfeeling to expect other people to pay their own bills. And so they're looking for panaceas, ways to get out of that kind of responsibility. And libertarianism says you can't get out of that.
Thomas Jefferson said, sometimes it's said man cannot be trusted with the government of himself. Can he then be trusted with the government of others?
Yeah, one of the essential arguments for libertarianism is even if it's true that people are stupid or ignorant or corrupt or whatever, even if you have a negative attitude toward human nature, that's all the more reason why people should not have power over other people's lives. So libertarians often get accused of believing in an overly optimistic view of human nature. I often have heard people say, oh, well, that would work really well. Freedom would be just fine if everybody was good. But actually, the opposite of that is true. It's the very fact that people aren't always good, that they have weaknesses and flaws. That is why they can't be trusted to control other people's lives. You own yourself. Who else owns you? Who else has a better right to own you or me? right? I'm the one who suffers if I make bad decisions. I'm the one who gets to enjoy the rewards if I make good decisions. So why should somebody else have this right to decide the direction of my own life?
To protect me from myself if I'm making bad decisions.
Right. That's always the excuse that's given. As Abraham Lincoln said, the kings never rode on top of the people because they wanted to. They always did it because the people were better off for being ridden upon. That was the excuse that was given to women in the 19th century, that we're going to deprive you of your freedom in order to protect you. And the image of the bird in the gilded cage comes from that. Very often, in fact, typically, the argument of, I'm going to protect you from yourself is the excuse that's given by people who want to take away our freedom.
When I was a kid, women were not allowed to have a credit card without their husband's or father's permission. How things have changed. And yet now the movement ignores the torture of women in other parts of the world and demands impossible equality here.
Yeah, unfortunately, for all sorts of political reasons, I think the left is much more comfortable condemning capitalist free societies than it is condemning totalitarian states or even theocratic dictatorships across the world. So, for example, it's much easier to say America is a terrible place because of the inequality or the pay gap between men and women or something like that, while at the same time ignoring the horrible oppression that goes on in the Middle East. And I think one reason for that is the left has this attitude that the reason for those kinds of offenses is because these countries are being oppressed by the evil capitalist West. It's sort of this mythology that other countries have their own way of living and would be all in peace and harmony if it weren't for us, that we are the corrupting force on the world. And as a result, you have this hypocrisy where feminists will condemn American society while keeping their mouths shut about what goes on in countries like Iraq and Iran.
For more of my content, go to johnstossel.com. I post a new short video every Tuesday. That's at johnstossel.com. Today, people on the left are very critical of the Supreme Court.
The radical, right-wing, runaway, illegitimate Supreme Court.
That's definitely not true. The U.S. Supreme Court today is a moderately conservative court with some elements that are a little bit more extreme than we've seen in previous years, but it's definitely not a runaway court. I think the Supreme Court has shown that it is willing to rule for or against the government based on the merits of the case before it.
People obsess about the federal government and the Supreme Court. You say that's not the best place when it comes to protecting our freedoms.
That's right. State Supreme Courts are often where the action really is when it comes to protecting individual liberty. We talk so much about the federal Constitution, we concentrate on the federal Bill of Rights, but in fact, state constitutions can protect our freedom much more than the federal Constitution does, and they often do. And
like what?
The right to privacy, which is not mentioned explicitly in the U.S. Constitution and is protected explicitly in most state constitutions.
Meaning, right to privacy. They don't feel very private. They invade whenever they want.
Unfortunately, that is the case. But one reason for that is that these state constitutional protections have been largely forgotten about. In Arizona, for example, we have a clause in the Arizona Constitution that protects your right to your private affairs. But in fact, the state Supreme Court has hardly ever explained what that means because lawyers have hardly ever argued it. And so we have a case pending right now in the Arizona Supreme Court on this private affairs clause. That case involves one of these donor disclosure laws that forces you to turn over your personal information to the government if you donate to a nonprofit organization that takes positions on political issues. And we say that that violates your right to privacy. If you donate money to an organization, you shouldn't have your name and phone number posted on some publicly accessible government list.
All right, this is one example, and it's kind of narrow, but you're making this big point. The state courts will protect our freedom. I'm not getting it.
The Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which provides the search warrant requirement. State constitutions also impose a search warrant requirement, but they're often much more vigorous than the federal Constitution. The U.S. Supreme Court has created all sorts of exceptions to the federal search warrant requirement. For example, checkpoints on the highway when the cops can stop your car to find out whether you've been drinking and so forth. Well, state courts have sometimes declared these to be unconstitutional. In Washington state, for example, They have very strong protections for privacy rights in their constitution, and checkpoints are unconstitutional in Washington. You need a warrant in Washington in many circumstances when you don't under the federal constitution. So if lawyers and judges would pay more attention to state constitutional protections, you'd have a lot more protection for freedom than you currently do.
The Border Patrol in your state is stopping people hundreds of miles from the border.
Yes, unfortunately, the federal Supreme Court has held that there's an exception to the search warrant requirement for within a range of the border. In fact, this range encompasses the entire state of Michigan, believe it or not, is within the range of the border that can be searched without a warrant under the federal constitution. But our state constitutions provide stronger protections. Obviously, that doesn't supersede federal law, unfortunately.
Representative from Tennessee.
Nothing's more important than our democracy.
That's not true. There's nothing more important than liberty. The first sentence of the U.S. Constitution calls liberty a blessing. It does not say the same thing about democracy. In fact, the word democracy appears nowhere in the Constitution of the United States. And that's for a simple reason. That is that the Constitution exists to protect us against democracy.
Against the mob.
That's right. There's the old saying that democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner. The reason we have a constitution is to protect the rights of the sheep against the wolves. We could have democracy very easily by just having mob rule. The majority is always right. And that's not the system we have. We have a system that protects freedom against democracy. Freedom is the more important value.
I fear it's just our destiny to lose freedoms a little bit all the time.
Well, I wouldn't be so pessimistic about it. I think what we've seen is that the thing flows both ways. A lot of the time people take their freedoms for granted, and so they stop paying attention to them, and government can grow and its control can expand. But at the same time, I think we've seen, even within our own lifetimes, we've seen people for whom freedom was often denied. They now have a claim to freedom that they never would have had before. Same-sex couples are a good example of that. Our system, one of the great blessings of our system is that the people's voices really still can be heard. And if the people care about freedom, then they can elect people who are going to protect freedom. Thomas Jefferson had this great line about how he thought that a little revolution now and then is a good thing and is as necessary as storms are in the physical world. And I think occasionally you will see people finally get fed up and demand more freedom, and that has happened, even within our lifetimes. The Reagan Revolution was an example of when people had finally been fed up with the Jimmy Carter era and its restrictions and regulations, and we saw a president say, government isn't the solution to our problems, government is the problem. And that is within living memory. There's no reason why it couldn't happen again.
So that thought is mocked today.
It is. But it wasn't that long ago that Bill Clinton said in one of his State of the Union addresses, the era of big government is over. No, I think there's no reason why people caused this mess. There's no reason why people can't fix this mess.
But the fact that you cite Reagan and then Clinton, and these were bright moments, but brief. It's like the trend is in the other direction.
I think the trend right now is in the other direction, but I see no reason to believe that that trend can't be reversed.
But spending keeps going up faster than we can pay for what they're spending.
Yes, that's true. I think one of the big problems there is that we have learned to borrow, and that way we can increase the size and scope of government without having to pay for it today. And it's always easier to get future generations to have to pay for it. So I'm not denying that there are all sorts of serious problems facing the country and facing the future of liberty, but there's also no reason to believe that it will persist that way. In 1975, if you had told people within 15 years the Soviet Union is going to collapse, a lot of people would have laughed in your face. And if you had said in 1760 that within a decade and a half, the Americans will be fighting for liberty and demanding their independence from Great Britain, I think people would have thought that was absurd. And yet these things have happened.
You can say you don't own me, but government does own a lot of me.
Well, government tries to take control over you, but I don't think government can ever really own you unless you let it. And I can't imagine government ever owning you, John.
Thank you, Tim Sandefur.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. New episodes drop the first Monday of every month. You can subscribe wherever you get podcasts.